Welcome to Archive Whispers, a place to fall asleep. Settle in, lower the lights, and let the archive open.
Tonight, the door we are going to open is a very old one, set into a wall of mud brick that has long since softened back into the plain, and beyond it lies a city that kept no record of this particular evening, because nothing happened in it worth the trouble of a scribe. There is no battle here, no decree, no procession of kings. There is only a single still night in Babylon, somewhere in the long reign of Nebuchadnezzar, and the slow business of a great city settling itself towards sleep. We are not going to witness any of the great events of this period, and that is on purpose. We will not stand in the throne room, nor watch the armies return, nor listen to the proclamations that were carved into stone so that we, far away, would still be able to read them. Those things have been told many times, and they are loud, and they belong to the daylight. What is left over, once all of that has been set aside, is the ordinary world, the streets after the markets close, the river going on as rivers do, the lamps in the houses lowered one by one. I should say, before we begin, that almost everything we know of this city comes to us second-hand and in fragments, pressed into clay and baked hard, or copied out by scholars long after the fact. The historians who have spent their lives with these fragments, people like Joan Oates and Paul Elaine Beaulieu, are careful to remind us how much we are guessing and how gently we ought to guess. So where this account is sure, it will say so plainly, and where it is only imagining, it will let you know, and you are welcome to let the difference blur as you drift. What we will do, then, is imagine a single ordinary night and move through it slowly, the way you might move through a house that is not yours while everyone in it sleeps. We will follow the river, and the wind that comes down the plain after dark, and the warmth that rises off the flat roofs where people have carried their beds to escape the heat of the rooms below. We will not be in a hurry. There is nowhere we have to be, and no one is expecting us, and the night is long. If you can, dim your lights now, and let the room go soft around you. There is nothing here you need to follow closely, and nothing you will be asked to remember in the morning. You may close your eyes whenever they would like to close, and the words will keep going, low and unhurried, the way the river keeps going past the quays whether or not anyone is awake to watch it. Let the city take you in. We will begin at the wall where the plain ends and Babylon begins. The wall, when you come to it out of the dark plain, does not announce itself so much as gather out of the night, a long, low mass that is darker than the sky behind it, and then taller than you expected, and then taller still. Babylon was ringed by more than one wall, an inner and an outer, with a broad space between them wide enough, the old accounts say, to turn a chariot, though tonight there are no chariots, only the packed earth cooling and the smell of dust and river that hangs over everything here after dark. Run your hand along the lowest course of brick and you will feel, here and there, a flatness pressed into the clay, a stamp that the men who laid the wall could not read either, most of them, but which named the king who had the wall built and rebuilt. Nebuchadnezzar had a habit of signing his bricks, tens of thousands of them, with a few modest lines that say, in effect, that he is the one who provided for the great temples and restored the city. The wall does not need to be read to be felt. It is simply there, and it has been there a long time. There is a gate, of course, more than one, but the one we will come to is the great northern gate, the one given over to the goddess Ishtar, and even in the dark it is plainly the most cared-for thing for a long way around. Its bricks are glazed, fired with a skin of color, and along its faces march low rows of animals in relief, bulls and long-bodied creatures that were half lion and half serpent and half something else, set out at regular intervals like a pattern on cloth. By day the glaze is said to shine. By night it only gleams faintly where a torch happens to pass it, a dull blue gone almost to gray, and the animals seem to be sleeping too. Through the gate runs the great street that the city kept for its processions, paved and raised, with walls on either side carrying still more of the patterned animals. On the nights of the spring festival, this street would have been crowded and lit, and full of slow movement. But this is not one of those nights. This is an ordinary night, and the processional way is empty. A long, pale channel of stone running south into the dark, holding the day's warmth a little longer than the earth around it, the way a stone path always does. A watchman stands somewhere near the gate, as watchmen do, though he is not watching for anything in particular. The city is not under threat tonight. The watch is simply a thing that the city does. A man and a brazier, and a long quiet stretch of hours. He has banked his small fire low, and he leans against the warm brick, and from time to time he shifts his weight and the leather of his sandal creaks, and that is, for a while, the loudest sound in this corner of Babylon. Beyond the gate the city opens out, and it is larger than a person can hold in the mind at any one time, which is part of why it was famous. Houses press against houses, flat-roofed and blank-walled toward the street, turning their windows inward to their own small courtyards. Lanes run between them, some barely wide enough for two people to pass, bending and doubling back, so that even those who lived here kept to the routes they knew. From the height of the wall it is all one dark fabric, broken only by the faint glow of a courtyard lamp here and there, like embers scattered and cooling across a wide hearth. The wind here comes down off the plain after dark, as it does across all flat country, cooler than the day by a long way, and carrying the dryness of the open land with it. It moves along the tops of the walls and finds the gaps between the houses and pours down into the lanes, and it makes the only steady sound there is, a low and even rushing that rises a little and falls a little and never quite stops. People who grew up in Babylon would not have heard it at all, the way you do not hear the sound of your own house. It was simply the sound the night made. It is worth saying, while we are still high on the wall and can see the shape of the whole place, that Babylon was a planned city as much as a grown one. The great street ran more or less straight. The river cut the city roughly in two. The temples and the palaces had their own districts, set apart and built high. But around and between all of that order, the ordinary city did what ordinary cities always do, which is to fill in every gap with houses and workshops and small shrines and walled gardens, until the plan was a kind of skeleton you could only see from above, or from very far away, or in the quiet of a night like this one. Let us come down off the wall now, by one of the long ramps of brick, and into the streets, where the scale of things becomes human again, and the city stops being a map and becomes a set of walls close on either side. The packed earth of the lane is still warm underfoot. The house walls give back the heat they soaked up all day, so that walking here at night is like passing your hand close above a stove that has been let go out, the warmth there but fading, comfortable rather than fierce. Somewhere not far off a door is drawn shut, the wood swollen and dragging a little against its frame, and then a wooden bar set across it. The small ordinary sounds of a household closing itself for the night. A dog, somewhere across the rooftops, considers barking and decides against it. The wind keeps on. And under the wind, so low you have to stop walking to be sure of it, there is the river, the long soft pull of moving water, which is where in a little while we are going to go. But there is no hurry to reach it. For now it is enough to stand in the lane with the warm wall at your back and let the size of the place settle over you, the knowledge that in every direction, for a great distance, there are rooms with people asleep in them, or lying awake in the dark the way people do, listening to the same wind. The city does not know that we are walking through it. It would not mind if it did. It has held far stranger things than a quiet visitor, and it has a long night ahead. And so, for now, do we. The river is called the Euphrates, and it does not belong to Babylon so much as Babylon belongs to it. For the city was set down here precisely because the river was here, and the whole patient arrangement of canals and fields and quays exists only to take what the river offers and pass it along. It comes from the north, from mountains no one in the city has seen, and it goes south toward the marshes and the sea, and it has been doing this for so long that it has worn itself a wide, soft bed through the plain, and the city sits along it like a town along a road. Along the bank the city built a wall of fired brick and bitumen, a quay to hold the river off the houses and to give the boats a hard edge to come against, and it is here, at the waterside, that the air finally changes. The dryness that the wind carried down the lanes gives way to something cooler and heavier. The smell of wet mud and reed and river weed, the particular green-brown breath of slow water. You can feel it on your face before you can see the river at all. Boats are tied up along the quay, more of them than you would think, because almost everything the city eats and burns and builds with came at least part of the way by water. There are long planked barges for grain and brick, and there are the round boats the people here have always used, woven of reeds and sealed with bitumen, light enough for one person to carry and shaped, more or less, like a great floating bowl. They knock softly against the brick as the water moves them, a hollow padded sound, and the ropes creak, and then they settle again. There was a bridge across the Euphrates here, which travelers in later centuries spoke of with some wonder. For bridging a river of this width was not a small thing. It stood on piers of brick set into the riverbed, with a roadway of timber laid across them, and the old reports say the timbers could be taken up at night, though whether that was truly done, or only said to have been done, is one of the many things about Babylon that we cannot now be sure of. Tonight the bridge stands dark and unmoving, a low line drawn across the paler water, and no one is crossing it. The water itself, close up, is not clear. It carries the plain along with it, fine pale silt that turns the river the color of weak clay even in daylight. And this silt is the whole secret of the place, for it is the silt that the canals carry out into the fields and lay down a little at a time, season after season, until flat dust becomes ground that will grow barley taller than a person. The river that makes the soft sound against the quay is the same river that feeds the entire patient country. It is doing both at once, all the time, without effort, without any sign that it is doing anything at all. A single boatman is still awake, or has woken, and sits in the stern of his moored craft doing nothing in particular, the way people sit by water everywhere and always have. He is a dark shape against the faint sheen of the river, his back to us, and now and then he leans and lets one hand trail in the current and then draws it back. He is not waiting for a fare. There will be no fares until the sky grays. He is simply keeping the river company, and it, in its way, is keeping his. On the far bank, which the city had also taken and walled and built upon, the lamps are fewer, and the great dark mass of the western district lies low and quiet under the same sky. Between the two halves of the city the river runs on, indifferent and useful, and the reflections of the few lamps lie along it in long broken threads of dull gold that shiver when the wind crosses the water and then knit themselves back together when it passes. You could watch this for a long time. People did. There is a particular kind of rest in watching moving water do nothing you need to attend to. The reeds along the bank lean and right themselves as the wind comes and goes, and somewhere among them a bird that fishes the shallows shifts on one leg and tucks its head a little deeper and is still again. The reed beds were their own small country, full of fish and waterfowl and the soft, constant business of growing things, and they fed the city quietly from its edges. At this hour, they are only a darker darkness at the waterline, rustling when the wind asks them to and falling silent when it stops. It is easy, here at the water, to forget the size of the city behind us. But it is worth remembering that everything we have seen so far, the wall and the gate and the long street and the dense dark fabric of houses, was built and fed and kept alive by this slow brown river and the work of turning its water out across the land. Babylon was, in the end, a thing the river made possible, the largest and most elaborate thing in a long line of such things, and it knew this, and it gave the river its due in 100 ways. But the river asks for nothing, and takes nothing, and goes on. We will leave the river now, though it is hard to leave, and it will be with us for the rest of the night anyway. Under everything else, the way the sound of water stays in your ears for a while after you walk away from it. We will turn back into the streets and find a single house, an ordinary one, and let ourselves in past the door that was barred a little while ago, and see how a family in Babylon made itself ready for sleep on a warm and unremarkable night. The river will keep on behind us. It always does. The house we have chosen is no one's in particular, which is to say it is like a great many of the houses here, a blank wall to the street with a single low door, and behind that wall a small open courtyard with the rooms set around it, so that the household looks inward, into its own square of sky, rather than out at the lane. This was the sensible way to build in a hot, dry country, and it is very old, older than Babylon, and it makes of every ordinary house a kind of quiet well, cool at the bottom, open at the top to the stars. In the courtyard the day's heat has begun, at last, to let go. The walls and the floor gave it back slowly through the evening, but now the open square of sky has been pulling it upward for some hours, and the air down here has gone from the hard heat of afternoon to something soft and forgiving, the kind of warmth you would choose if you could choose. A water jar stands in the coolest corner, its porous clay sweating a little, keeping the water inside it cooler than the night by the oldest trick there is. The evening meal is over, and its remains sit covered against the wall, to be finished in the morning or given to the animals. A flat round bread, dense and a little sour, the staple here as it was everywhere barley would grow, a bowl of something boiled with onion and oil, a few dates, sticky and dark and sweeter than anything else the household will taste. Nothing has been wasted. Nothing here ever was. The kitchen fire has been raked down to a few embers under a film of ash, enough to wake again at dawn, not enough to warm the room, which no one wants warmed. One lamp is still lit, a small shallow dish of clay with a lip pinched into it to hold the wick, and a little oil, and a flame no larger than a thumbnail. It does not so much light the room as mark a place in the dark, a soft amber point with a circle of glow around it that fades off into shadow at the corners. By this light a woman of the household is doing the last small thing of the day, perhaps coiling a length of spun wool, perhaps only sitting with her hands quiet in her lap, the way one does at the end of a long day when the work is finally properly done. The rooms of the house are small and dark, and would be stifling to sleep in on a night like this, and so, as people did all over the city and all across this whole hot country, the household has carried its beds up onto the roof. There is a stair of brick in one corner of the courtyard, narrow and a little steep, worn shallow in the middle by the passage of bare feet, and it climbs to the flat roof where the air moves and the heat of the day cannot follow. On the roof the wind we walked through in the streets is steadier and cleaner, and the whole sky is open overhead, and the stars, away from the lamps, are very many and very bright. Reed mats and thin mattresses are laid out, and low walls run around the edge of the roof so that no one rolls off in the night, and so that the family is screened. A little, from the families on the roofs to either side, who are doing exactly the same thing at exactly this hour. The whole city lying down together under the same stars, without anyone having arranged it. The children are already asleep, as children are, having fought it and lost in the usual way, and they lie sprawled and heavy and certain in the manner that only the very young can manage. The older members of the household lie down more carefully, arranging an arm, a cover against the cooling of the small hours, and they do not fall asleep at once. They lie and look up, as you might be doing now, and let the day come apart behind their eyes, the small worries loosening one by one, because there is nothing further to be done about any of them tonight. From up here the sounds of the whole quarter come together into one soft texture, the wind across the rooftops first of all, and under it the river, and under that the thousand small noises a sleeping city makes without meaning to, a cough, a jar set down, a goat shifting in a pen, a fragment of someone's late conversation carried and lost on the air. None of it is sharp enough to keep anyone awake. It is, instead, the sound of not being alone, which is its own kind of comfort, and people slept better for it without ever putting the reason into words. Down in the empty courtyard, the last lamp has been let go out, the little flame drowning in its own oil and then gone, and a thread of smoke climbs the well of the house and is taken by the wind at the roofline. The house is dark now from the inside out, the way a house should be at this hour, holding its sleeping people the way the city holds its houses, and the way the plane holds the city, each thing folded into something larger and quieter than itself. There is nothing left for the household to do but breathe, and slow, and sleep. We will leave this household to its rest, having looked in on it the way you might look in on a sleeping room, and then quietly draw the door to. There were tens of thousands of such houses in Babylon, and in nearly all of them, on nearly every warm night. Very nearly this same small ceremony of banking the fire and climbing to the roof and lying down under the stars was carried out, without ceremony, without record, by people whose names we will never know and who never imagined that anyone would one day try to imagine them. And yet here we are, doing exactly that. Near the middle of the city, set apart in its own walled precinct, stands the great temple of the god the Babylonians held first among gods, and beside it rises the structure for which the city is, in some quarters, still chiefly remembered, the high-stepped tower, the ziggurat, built up in receding terraces of brick toward a small shrine at its summit. The Babylonians gave it a name that means, more or less, the house that is the foundation of heaven and earth. And tonight it is a great dark shape against the stars, its edges softened by distance, and the haze of the warm air. We will not climb it, and in truth ordinary people did not climb it either. The high places of the temples were the business of priests, and the long stair was walked by feet that had been ritually prepared, on days appointed for it, for reasons the rest of the city took on trust. What mattered to the city was simply that it was there, the largest made thing any of them would ever see, kept in repair across the reigns of kings, each of whom added his bricks and his name to the immense slow accumulation, so that the tower was less a building than a kind of patient civic habit, made of mud and time. But there are men awake on a high terrace tonight, a small number of them, and they are not praying. They are watching the sky and writing down what they see, and they have been doing this, here and in cities like it, for so many generations that the record they are keeping is one of the longest unbroken acts of attention our kind has ever managed. Night after night, for centuries, someone climbed to a high place in this country and noted where the moon stood, and which of the wandering stars had risen, and whether the night was clear, and pressed it all into clay. It is worth pausing on what they were actually doing, because it is easy to make it sound stranger than it was. They believed, as nearly everyone then believed, that the movements of the sky and the affairs of the earth were bound together, and that a careful reader of the one might learn something of the other. But to read the sky carefully, you must first record it carefully, and so, in the service of that belief, these watchers became the patient keepers of measurements so exact that scholars today still use them, still reach back across more than 2,000 years to the nights these men wrote down, and find them true. From their terrace, the sky is enormous and entirely clear, the way it can only be over a flat, dry land far from any other light, and the stars are not the scattered handful a city dweller of a later age might know, but a deep crowded field of them, thick along the band of pale light that crosses the whole sky, faint near the edges, and so many in the dark spaces between the bright ones that the eye gives up trying to count and simply rests in them. The wind moves up here too, cooler than below, and it carries the small dry sounds of the high places and nothing else. The moon, if it is up tonight, moves so slowly that you cannot see it move, and yet by the same hour tomorrow it will have shifted its place among the stars by a little, and the watchers know exactly how much, and could tell you where it will stand a month from now, or a year, or further. They had learned that the sky, for all its apparent freedom, keeps to its measures, that the wandering stars wander by rule, that what seems like the most open and uncountable thing there is turns out, when watched long enough and written down carefully enough, to be deeply and consolingly regular. There is a great rest in that idea, and it is the same rest the watchers must have felt, leaning on the parapet between one observation and the next, with the whole sleeping city below them and the whole turning sky above. Whatever troubled the kingdom, whatever a person carried up the long stair with them, the sky kept its measures regardless, and would go on keeping them long after the watcher, and the king, and the city itself had been folded back into the plain. To know that is not a sad thing, up there in the dark. It is, more than anything, a way of being let off, for a while, from minding. Down below in the temple's lower courts, the night is given over to a few quiet caretakers and the long routines of a house that is thought to be a god's actual dwelling, lamps tended, doors watched, the small ordinary upkeep that any great household needs and that does not stop because it is dark. There is no drama in it. A man trims a wick and moves on. Another sits by a doorway with a staff across his knees and lets the hours go by. The temple, like the city, mostly just continues quietly, through the night, looked after by people doing undramatic things with care. We will come down from the high places now, the way the watchers eventually will, when the part of the sky they came to see has set and there is nothing left to write. We will leave them to their parapet and their tablets and the great wheeling field of stars, and carry away with us only the thing they knew, which is worth carrying into sleep. That above the warm, dark city and its river and its walls, the old measured sky is turning exactly as it should, and will be turning still in the morning, and needs nothing at all from us in order to do it. Back in the lower streets, the quarters where the trades were carried on lie quiet now, each in its own way. By day, these lanes belong to particular crafts, the way such lanes often did, so that a person could go where the metalworkers were, or the potters, or the weavers, or those who dealt in reeds, and find a whole street given over to one patient kind of making. At night the work is set aside, the half-finished things covered against the dust, the tools laid down where the hand will find them again at first light, and the lanes hold only the smells of what is made there, and the warmth still rising from the day. The market square, where by day the noise and crowding were at their thickest, is at this hour simply a wide empty space, the booths struck down to their frames or packed away, the ground swept by feet into a hard, smooth floor, and now swept again, more gently, by the wind. A few stray things remain, a broken basket against a wall, a scatter of date stones, a dog moving along the edges on business of its own. Tomorrow it will all fill again, voices over voices, but tonight the square belongs to no one, and the wind has it to itself. Whatever passed in that square by day, the buying and the selling and the endless small reckonings, was held together by something quieter and far less visible, which was the writing. Babylon ran on clay. Every loan and lease and marriage and sale, every measure of barley moved from one store to another, every wage and debt and ration, was pressed into a tablet by a trained hand and kept, and the city kept tens of thousands upon tens of thousands of these, in temple stores and palace rooms, and the houses of those whose business it was to remember on the city's behalf. In a small room off a courtyard, a scribe is still at his work, or back at it, having woken and found his mind too full to sleep and chosen to empty it onto clay instead. He sits cross-legged with a fresh tablet cradled in one palm, soft and gray and faintly damp, and a cut reed in the other, and he presses the wedge marks in with a quick economy of movement, a turn of the wrist for each sign, the script he learned as a boy by copying it 10,000 times until his hand knew it better than his mind did. It is hard to overstate how much of what we know of this whole world we owe to that quick turn of the wrist, repeated across 1,000 years by people who thought they were only doing the day's accounts. They wrote down the price of barley and the wages of harvesters and the terms of small loans, never imagining that the clay would outlast the palaces, that their throwaway records would survive when the great inscriptions cracked, and that we would one day read the receipts of Babylon more easily than we read its poems. The most ordinary writing turned out to be the most durable. There may be a small comfort in that, somewhere. The grain that all those tablets counted was kept in great stores against the uneven generosity of the river. And these granaries stand dark and shut along certain streets, thick-walled and high, the most carefully guarded buildings in the city after the temples. Because everyone understood that a city of this size lived always at one bad season's distance from hunger. Tonight they are full, or full enough, and the knowledge of that fullness lies under the city's sleep like a hand under a tired head, a plain physical reassurance that there will be bread in the morning, and the morning after. There were gardens in Babylon too, real ones, walled plots within the city and broad orchards of date palm beyond the walls, watered by the canals and tended with the same patience as everything else. And there is, of course, a famous story of a garden grander than any of these, a garden raised up in terraces and kept green high above the ground by water lifted somehow from the river, a wonder that later writers placed here and marveled at. Whether such a garden truly stood in Babylon, and if it did, where, is something scholars still turn over, for the city's own records are silent on it. So we will let it be only what it has always best been, a story told of this place on nights when the real gardens were enough. All of it, the trades and the market and the writing and the grain and the gardens, fit together into a single working thing, a city, which is among the more remarkable arrangements our kind has ever made, and also, from close-up, on an ordinary night, among the least dramatic. A city is mostly people agreeing, without ever quite saying so, to keep doing their small parts, to make the pots, to count the barley, to mind the gate, to lift the water, to come back tomorrow and do it again. Babylon was very large and very old, and so its agreement was very deep, worn smooth by generations, almost invisible, like the dip in a stone step. The scribe in his small room sets down his stylus at last and looks at what he has made, and finds it good enough, and lays the tablet flat to dry with the others. He pinches out his lamp. For a moment the after-image of the flame hangs in the dark, and then it too fades, and he lies back on his mat in a room that smells of damp clay and lamp oil, and lets the day's accounts settle and go quiet in him the way the city has gone quiet around him. The work will keep. The clay will harden. The morning will come and ask for more, and there will be more to give it. It is very late now, later than the watchers, later than the scribe, into the part of the night that has no business in it at all. The long, smooth middle of the dark when even the wind seems to lower its voice. The lamps of the city have gone out one by one until only a stray few remain. The watchman's banked fire, a lamp left burning by someone who could not sleep. And these are so few and so far apart that the dark between them has joined up into one soft continuous dark over the whole of Babylon. And the river again goes on, it does not sleep. The river, it has no need to, and no way to, and it moves past the dark quays exactly as it moved past them at dusk, the same slow weight of water sliding south toward the marshes, carrying the same fine pale silt, making the same soft sound against the brick that no one now is awake to hear. The boats knock gently and are still. The reeds lean and right themselves. The river goes on, under everything, the way it has gone on for longer than the city, and will go on after. On the rooftops the families lie deep in sleep, turned and settled into whatever shapes the night has folded them, and their breathing has slowed and evened until a whole roof, a whole street of roofs, the whole quarter, rises and falls together in a rhythm too slow and too quiet to notice unless you were looking for it. The children have not stirred. The covers have been pulled up against the cool of the small hours. The stars have wheeled a little further over while no one watched, and no one minds, and there is nothing now that anyone needs to do. And the wind, again, comes down off the plain, cooler now than at any hour of the night, moving along the tops of the walls and pouring down into the empty lanes and crossing the dark river and climbing the far bank and going on, out into the country beyond, over the canals and the dark fields of barley and the orchards of date palm, over the low villages where other people sleep, and on into the open land where there is no one at all, where the wind has only itself and the dust and the stars for company, as it has had for a very long time. There is a single lamp still burning, somewhere in the dark city, in the room of someone who has not been able to sleep. And the small flame leans and steadies, in the faint moving air, throwing its soft amber circle on the wall and asking nothing. Perhaps they are listening to the wind. Perhaps they are listening to the river under the wind. Perhaps they are only watching the flame, the way people have always watched a flame in the last waking hour, until the watching softens and slows and begins, at last, to come apart. You do not need to stay awake for the rest of it. There is no rest of it, not really. Only more of the same slow kindness, the wind and the river and the wheeling stars and the breathing rooftops, going on and on through the dark without needing to be witnessed. If your eyes have closed already, let them stay closed. If they are closing now, let them. The city will keep. The river will keep. The words will keep going a while longer, low and even, the way the water keeps going past the quays, whether or not anyone is awake to hear. And the river again goes on, the same slow weight of pale water sliding south through the heart of the sleeping city, past the dark bridge, past the moored boats, past the leaning reeds, carrying the silt that makes the fields, asking nothing, taking nothing, keeping its old measure as faithfully as the stars keep theirs overhead. There is nowhere it is hurrying to. There is nowhere any of us is hurrying to, tonight. The night is long and wide, and there is room in it for all the rest you can take. And the wind again moves over the rooftops, cooler and softer now, smoothing the night down toward its quietest hour, and somewhere in the smoothing the last lamp gutters low, and leans, and lets go, and the soft amber circle slides off the wall and is gone, and the room takes the dark in gently, the way the city took it, the way the plane took the city, each small light folded at last into the one great patient darkness that holds the whole sleeping country in its hand. So we will leave it there, the still night in Babylon, the way we found it, with the wall gathered out of the dark and the river going by and the warm rooftops full of sleeping people under the slow and faithful stars. Nothing happened here tonight, which was the whole of its gift. There will be a morning, and the fires will be woken, and the boats untied, and the long agreement of the city taken up again. But that is hours away yet, and need not concern us, and need not concern you. Rest now. The night is keeping watch. Sleep well, and let the old city, and the old river, and the old turning sky keep going softly on without you, into the dark, until the light.
You've reached the end of tonight's archive. If you're still awake, thank you for staying. And if you drifted off somewhere in the dark, then it did its work. Rest now. The next chapter will be here when you are. Sleep well. This has been Archive Whispers.